I always like how the story starts in the middle. That's the trick. You cut the tape right where it's convenient, and suddenly everyone looks like a monster, except the people holding the scissors. The Crusades, they say in that tone. The tone that means we've already decided what you're allowed to think. Cue the violins, armored brutes, red crosses, blood everywhere. End of story. Roll credits. Don't ask what happened before. Don't rewind. History apparently begins the moment Western men do something ugly, as if the centuries before were just a loading screen. But here's the thing that gnaws at me at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, wondering why I even bother reading this stuff anymore. You don't get 200 years of religious war because somebody woke up cranky in France. For roughly 300 to 400 years before the First Crusade, the Christian world was on the receiving end of a slow, grinding expansion. Not a metaphorical one, an actual boots-on-the-ground, swords-out expansion. The Middle East, North Africa, Spain, yes, all of Spain, chunks of Italy, the Balkans, Christian lands that were conquered, churches repurposed or destroyed, populations taxed into submission, converted, displaced, enslaved, coastal towns raided, pilgrims robbed, beaten, killed, trade routes turned into toll booths run by people with scimitars and a bad attitude. They were only roughly 150 miles away from Paris at one point, by the way. That's not history on a map. That's your front yard burning while everyone pretends it's someone else's problem. But none of that gets framed as aggression. It gets framed as history happening. As if conquest is only conquest when Europeans do it, and everything else is just a cultural exchange program with swords. By the time the Crusades roll around, Jerusalem hadn't been Christian for centuries. Christians living under Muslim rule weren't equals, they were tolerated dependents. Dhimmis. Protected, sure, like livestock is protected as long as it pays its tax and doesn't get uppity. Every now and then, protection failed. Massacres happened, churches were burned, holy sites vandalized, pilgrimage routes turned into extortion rackets. This wasn't some secret, people knew. Refugees and stories traveled. The Crusades were reactive. Late, desperate, and not at all unprovoked. The Byzantine Empire, Christian, battered, bleeding, didn't call the West because it was bored. It called because it was getting eaten alive, piece by piece. When the Pope said, hey, maybe we should do something, it wasn't a Marvel villain monologue. It was more like a guy yelling, they're at the door, you idiots, Avengers assemble. Now, did Crusaders commit atrocities? Of course they did. Human beings with weapons always do. You don't march tens of thousands of illiterate, hungry, terrified men across continents and expect polite conversation. War is ugly. But the idea that brutality somehow invalidates causation is laughable. If brutality disqualifies self-defense, then self-defense has never existed in human history. What really grinds my gears is the selective outrage. The centuries of conquest before the Crusades. Shrug. The slave raids that dragged Europeans off to markets in North Africa and the Middle East. Footnote. The constant pressure on Europe's borders. Background noise. But when Europe finally snaps, badly, violently, it's suddenly the original sin of Western civilization. After centuries of invasion, raids, humiliation, and the slow erasure of a civilization, the very act of standing up, of saying enough, was profoundly human. It was brave, it was defiant, it was heroic. History isn't a courtroom with permanent villains and saints. It's a chaotic struggle where humans make choices out of fear, pride, and survival. I no longer buy the children's book version that reduces the Crusades to a story of Western men being uniquely evil. I see the messier, truer picture, a people pushed to the edge who fought to endure, and in doing so showed a kind of heroism that can't be erased or dismissed.